The unyielding sun hung low over the barren expanse, casting long, gaunt shadows across the cracked earth. Maeve stood alone, a solitary figure etched against the harsh horizon, her silhouette trembling under the weight of unspeakable losses. The wind whispered through the dry grass, carrying a hollow silence that settled deep within her bones. Without warning, the restless clatter of horses and raucous voices shattered the stillness. A band of ruffians rode in, confident and menacing, their eyes set on breaking the fragile quiet that Maeve clung to. The farm stretched wide beneath a cloudless sky, a desolate patch of scorched soil and twisted mesquite, where the relentless sun bleached every surface, and the scent of dust lingered heavy in the air. Weathered fences swayed faintly, creaking in the dry breeze, enclosing a homestead worn thin by drought and time. The land itself seemed to hold its breath, bearing witness to the weight of solitude and secrets buried beneath its cracked surface. Maeve moved with the measured stillness of someone who bore invisible armor, a silence so deep it veiled the storm just beneath her skin. Her eyes, pools of lingering sorrow and steely resolve, scanned the horizon with a distant calm that few dared challenge. The neighboring town whispered her name, shrouded in quiet rumors, as a woman shaped as much by grief as by a hidden strength that refused to break. Behind her bowed shoulders lay memories of a husband lost to a bullet and children swallowed by the merciless frontier, losses that silenced her voice but sharpened her watchfulness. The ruffians swept onto her land like a prowling pack, horses stomping against the brittle earth, their laughter sharp and predatory. They dismounted without haste, staking claim to the terrain with careless arrogance, their eyes appraising the desperate calm in Maeve's gaze. Their intent was clear: dominate the quiet, seize what could be taken, and beat down any flicker of resistance. Maeve's posture remained composed, a ghost among the dust, her silence a barrier thicker than any gunmetal. They mistook this stillness for weakness, mistaking shadows for surrender. As the sun dipped lower, tension coiled tighter around the farmstead. The ruffians exchanged suspicious glances, unsettled by the woman who said nothing, who moved with no haste but held a watchful stillness that spoke volumes. One edge of the group hovered near the weather-beaten porch, poking and jeering, trying to provoke a crack in her stoic veneer. Maeve met their gazes without yielding, her quiet defiance ringing louder than any shout. The silent standoff stretched thin the air, every breath taut with danger. Then, near the tumble-down cabin, a coarse laugh broke through as one of the men's boots struck something half-buried beneath the dust. Bent low, he pulled free an ancient dagger, its handle wrapped in worn leather, its blade glinting with the faint shimmer of stained steel. An APACHE relic, its presence igniting a sudden flicker in Maeve's eyes, a shadow darker than the gathering night, cold and sharp. Her gaze locked on the blade, now a beacon of a silent vengeance that no words could voice, but that promised fire beneath the calm. Many companions along these forgotten trails have shared that fate sometimes unravels even the strongest threads, be it destiny or the trickery of the YouTube algorithm. Before the next perilous path reveals itself and a new twist unfolds. Glance just below this video and ensure you're still signed up with our pack to keep following the trail's thread. We don't want you to miss a single voice across this valley. Check your subscription now and join our saga. Night had fallen like a heavy curtain over Maeve's lonely ranch. The air, thick with the lingering heat of day, clung to the cracked earth and withered brush. Inside her modest cabin, Maeve moved with the silent precision of a shadow moved by vengeance. The Apache knife, the very relic uncovered by the ruffian's careless boot earlier, rested secure in her weathered hand. Its worn leather grip was familiar beneath her fingers, like it held memories whispered only to her. Outside, the ruffians sprawled across the porch and yard, their laughter muffled by the darkness, but laced with reckless confidence. They believed the woman they sought to intimidate was broken, rooted in silence and submission. They had no inkling of the storm weaving quietly around them. Maeve's breathing was slow and steady. Years of secret training, taught by an old Apache scout who once passed through her broken world, flooded back. With clarity, she moved deliberately, beginning her work in the dark. Every step measured, every corner of her homestead mapped with a hunter's cunning. Raised in the crucible of loss, her mind had become a labyrinth of traps, physical snares concealed beneath loose dirt, sharpened sticks hidden among the mesquite thorns, and subtle psychological snares designed to unsettle and fracture. She placed tripwires, thin as spider silk, near the water barrels. A scatter of alertness, hidden in plain sight, she arranged knives within reach beneath the floorboards, silent guardians of her domain. The cabin's creaking boards became her allies, their subtle groans waiting to betray unwary feet. Her eyes briefly flicked toward the small window, overlooking the sleeping silhouettes beyond. The ruffians' harsh snores, evidence of their overconfidence. The air felt tight, pressed with an impending reckoning. Hours passed, but the night did not grow quieter. Among the ruffians, unease began to curl like smoke. Whispers skirted the campfire's glow. Odd sounds, fleeting shadows, and the sense of being watched stirred their nerves. Tensions rose as the ruffians shifted uneasily against the darkness's grip. Then, from the far edge of the yard, a low groan broke the night. One of them stumbled into view, clutching a crimson-stained hand. The cut was deep, jagged, the kind inflicted by something sharp, swift, and unseen. Panic sparked in their eyes as they gathered around their wounded companion, voices cracking with disbelief. "How?" one spat through gritted teeth. "We didn't hear a thing." Maeve watched from the shadows, beyond the thick mesquite, her breath steady as the tension coiled. The ruffians began to doubt the safety of their claim. Eyes darted uneasily to dark corners, weapons gripped tighter. Accusations whispered among themselves like poisonous threads at their campfire. Suspicion mutated their bravado into fractured paranoia. Maeve's mind was already weaving the next phase of her silent assault. Each second of their uncertainty was a blade turned in her favor. Under the weight of darkness, she slipped through the shadows, becoming the ghost that haunted their restless unrest. Her movements betrayed no sound. The wind in her favor concealed the whisper of leather against soil. The Apache knife gleamed cold in her hands, a deadly extension of her will, born of pain and tempered in silence. She paused at the edge of the ruffians' camp, flattening herself to the dry earth to study their scattered arrangement. Paths of least resistance, vulnerable backs, guards lulled into false security. Her fingers tightened around the handle. Memories flickered unbidden. The old scout's words, the drills in moonlit clearings, the reforging of broken spirit into lethal grace. Pain had carved her into this shadow. Sorrow spun the steel in her veins. There was no room for mistake. A sudden noise made her freeze. A twig snapping underfoot, perhaps, or a breath caught too sharply. One of the ruffians rose slowly, scanning the darkness with narrowed eyes. A slow ripple of terror moved through him, though he could not name its source. The others stirred, unease now erupting. Into alarm, Maeve melted back into the blackness just as the man's gaze swept past her hiding spot. The ruffians exchanged harsh whispers, their unity fracturing beneath suspicion's invisible scalpel. Inside the cabin, Maeve's hands moved swiftly, yet calmly, retrieving another dagger from its hiding place. The house itself seemed alive in her grasp, an extension of her silent, punishing will. Time was her ally and enemy all at once. Suddenly, a sharp cry tore through the night, a cursed howl of pain and fear. A ruffian collapsed just beyond the porch steps, clutching a bleeding thigh, his eyes wide with the stark face of dread. No one saw the blade before it struck. No one heard the flicker of leather and steel slicing through the night's heavy silence. The ruffians scrambled, the fragile mask of control shattered. Maeve's vengeance had begun in earnest. The camp erupted into chaos. Men shouted, weapons were drawn, and the once confident ruffians flailed in terror, their movements desperate and disorganized under the weight of an invisible but deadly enemy. They fought shadows and paranoia, each suspecting the other, fractured by fear and the sudden realization. The quiet widow was their ghost, their hunter. Maeve retreated into the darkness, her heart steady, knowing their unraveling was only the first movement in her deadly dance. The night stretched on, thick with tension and hidden threats. Somewhere beyond a faint light, an unseen wound bled silently. And as the shadows deepened, one of the ruffians was found alone, trembling, bearing a deep cut, a silent message carved in flesh and fear. The hunt had begun. The ruffians' uneasy glances grew sharper, their whispered accusations more bitter. Someone was striking within their ranks, unstoppable and invisible. And somewhere in the darkness, Maeve's silent revenge was only gathering momentum. The night's heavy silence cracked as one of the ruffians slipped cautiously from the cluster of restless shadows near the fire. His boots stirred leaves and brittle sticks on the ground, betraying his intent to scout beyond their fragile perimeter. The others lay exhausted, lulled into uneasy sleep, their bravado fading beneath the weight of the unseen threat that haunted their camp. His breath was shallow and measured, every sound carried by the chill wind that hinted at danger. Lurking just beyond the flickering flames, Maeve melded seamlessly with the darkness, a shadow among shadows. Every muscle coiled like a spring, every sense sharpened by years of silent waiting. Her grip tightened around the worn APACHE knife, a blade that had been a lifeline, a teacher, and now her instrument of reckoning. The phantom scar beneath her sleeves ached faintly, a reminder of the woman she once was, before the cruel hands of fate forged her anew. The ruffian crept toward the thicket where the moonlight dared not reach, his eyes darting between the trees and the faint outlines of Maeve's dilapidated cabin. His footsteps hesitated, the uneasy feeling growing like a poison in his veins. A sudden rustle, too subtle for the others to hear, froze him in place. A shadow flickered, a movement unlike any animal's, swift, deliberate, and deadly. Before he could call out an alarm, the cold kiss of steel found flesh. A breathless gasp tore from his lips as Maeve's blade bit deep, piercing the silence with a soundless cut. Her strike was a whisper of death, practiced and precise, a decree of vengeance delivered in the language of shadows. He crumpled to the earth, lips shrinking into a silent scream, the taste of iron flooding his mouth. From the firelight, the chaos erupted. A startled shout, a rifle, swung toward the darkness. Too late. Confusion spiraled through the group like wildfire as suspicion blossomed between the trembling men. Every glance carried accusation. Every shadow morphed into a lurking threat. They grasped their weapons tighter, but unease had already taken root. Amid the turmoil, muffled memories flickered in Maeve's mind. The long nights spent training under the fierce gaze of an old APACHE scout haunted her still. Nights when every movement was honed to lethal grace, every strike a note in a silent symphony of survival. She was remade then, carved from pain and silence alike, her scars both seen and unseen, shaping the woman poised now to reclaim what was stolen from her. The ruffians gathered, voices hushed, yet tense, strains of fear tangled with anger. They circled their fallen comrade, whose ragged breathing mingled with whispered curses. His wound bled not only flesh, but confidence. The notion that any of them might fall unseen unsettled the fragile order of their numbers. "Who's out here?" a voice hissed, dagger eyes scanning the darkness. "We're being hunted." Doubt gnawed away at their courage, threading suspicion into bitter whispers. Friends eyed one another with thinly veiled mistrust. Maeve's presence was a ghostly heartbeat through the night. She darted between twisted mesquite and cracked earth, moving without sound or hesitation. Her blade flashed like a fleeting shadow, striking fast and clean. The ruffians' terror unraveled them from within, splintering their unity. She paused only briefly to drink in the layout of their fractured camp, their uneven watch, the careless step of a man too tense to breathe properly. Her pulse synchronized with memories unsaid, the disciplined rituals of knife drills beneath an indifferent moon, the cold stare of the scout who taught her how to blend pain into power. A sharp crack, perhaps a dry branch breaking underfoot, jerked her still. One ruffian stirred, his eyes narrowing as he sought the source of his unease. hands curling around rifle barrels. The men slowly rose, the night turning from enemy to accomplice. Their tight formations dissolved as paranoia pricked their ranks, retreated into the forgiving cloak of darkness. Yet her will was a steel thread spun through the night. Back inside her cabin, hands steady and silent, she equipped another dagger from the hidden cache beneath the flooring. Each weapon a promise, precise, cold, and unyielding. Suddenly a piercing scream ripped the quiet. A ruffian yelped, clutching his bleeding side as he staggered near the porch. Panic infected their ranks like a relentless fever. No one saw the strike. No one caught the movement that felled him in shadows. The ruffians fired blindly, shouts fracturing the still night. The widow's vengeance had moved from whispered legend to deadly reality. Their confidence shattered. They cast wild, fearful looks among themselves, their trust dissolving into a swirling storm of accusations and dread. Every footstep felt like a blade poised to strike, every flicker of movement a specter of death. Maeve, calm and unyielding, slipped away as though swallowed by the very night itself. The hunt was no longer in its infancy. It had bloomed into a terrifying presence stalking the broken band before her. Their voices faded into whispered panic, their unity crumbling beneath the weight of terror. No bullet could stop, but in the suffocating quiet, another shadow moved. A figure among the camp's outskirts found trembling, clutching a jagged cut, tracing a crimson promise across his flesh. A message carved in silence and fear. Quietly, the leader of the band rubbed his scarred jaw, eyes narrowing. He gathered the trembling forms of his men, a dark realization hardening beneath his gaze. He said nothing aloud, but the decision was clear: to capture the elusive widow before her ghost swallowed them all. The trap was being set, and with that silent threat hanging thick in the air, the night held its breath for what was to come. The night air hung heavy with a breathless stillness, broken only by the ragged gasps and desperate shuffles of the ruffians scattered across Maeve's homestead. Their plan, hatched in the flickering glow of dwindling campfire flames, had crumbled before it even fully formed. Expecting to catch a silent widow unprepared, they had instead been met with whispers of steel and ghostly shadows that turned advantage into ruin. Now, as Emma's dry earth swallowed the heavy footsteps of their failed ambush, Maeve moved like a phantom among the mesquite, her body a fluid instrument of quiet devastation. Each breath she took was measured, each movement deliberate. She was no longer the broken woman the world imagined. She was the storm calm before the strike, poised at the edge of retribution. The attackers, once a band bound by swagger and crude jokes, now fractured, their unity shattered by suspicion and bloodied bodies. Raucous curses had dwindled to trembling whispers, fingers twitching near weapons, drawn more against their own shadows than any threat visible. Distrust prowled between them, silent and suffocating. A shallow groan came from the far side of the yard as Jacob, one of the bolder ruffians, limped into view. His shirt was torn wide open, crimson staining the fabric in sickening contrast to the dull browns of dust and wood. He clutched his left side, dark rivulets trickling through his fingers. Pain was etched in every line of his face, fear curling like smoke in his eyes. He staggered toward the group, sending ripples of alarm through the weary men. "What the hell happened?" snarled Garrett, his tone sharp enough to cut the night. The others shifted closer, forming a ragged circle around the wounded man. Jacob's eyes darted wildly. "It came out of nowhere," he rasped, voice raw. "No sound, no warning, just a knife. Sharp, fast." Gallows humor dissolved into grim tension. The ruffians looked to one another, confusion infecting their swagger. They scanned the darkened perimeter. Every brush, every patch of shadow seemed alive with threat. Maeve watched unseen, her grip tightening around her prized Apache blade. She could feel the wave of fear unraveling the strangers who desecrated her land. Their fractures, once hidden beneath false bravado, were now exposed, bleeding like the torn flesh at Jacob's side. They began to spread out, eyes darting, hands trembling with impatience and dread. Their attempts to reclaim control were futile. The land itself seemed to rail against them for their arrogance. Suddenly, a sharp snap broke the tense quiet. A twig crushed beneath a boot in the darkness. A figure rose silently from the shadow's edge. David, the band's lookout, his gaze narrowing as he searched the ink-black field for threats unseen. His breath caught in his throat. Maeve's heart beat in perfect rhythm with the old lessons etched deep in her muscles. In this moment, she was no longer the silent widow. She was the hunter who had learned to move unseen, to strike without sound. The blade in her hand gleamed faintly as moonlight fought past the mesquite, reflecting a silent promise of death. David's fingers twitched, inches from his rifle. He turned with a jerky motion, sensing eyes that did not belong to the natural darkness. A feeling that coiled in his gut like a living thing. But before he could shout a warning, the wind whispered a deadly secret. With a movement swift as thought, Maeve detached herself from the shadows and delivered a precise slash. The cold steel kissed flesh with surgical finality. David stumbled back, a strangled yelp escaping his lips as he collapsed into the once barren dust. His rifle clattered uselessly beside him. Chaos erupted instantly. Shouts carved the night air. Rifles raised blindly toward the shadows where Maeve had just vanished. The ruffians scrambled, disoriented by an enemy who seemed part specter, part vengeance incarnate. Each man's terrified gaze flickered to every companion, suspicion fracturing what was left of their resolve. "She's here, among us," Garrett spat, voice shaking. The men's unity unraveled under the corrosive weight of paranoia. Fingers clenched tight on weapons, trembled as they fought, not the widow, but the fear that gripped their own hearts. Maeve slipped back into the cloak of darkness, breath steady and silent. Her mind raced, threading memories of an old Apache scout, a mentor who had carved lessons of patience and precision into her soul. Years of moonlit nights spent mastering the dance of blade and shadow now bled into this moment. She paused at the cabin's edge, feeling the weight of the world condense into a single point where vengeance met justice. Her hands moved quickly beneath loose floorboards, retrieving another dagger as the ruffians pulled their fractured forces together. Suddenly, a scream shattered the air, raw, primal, and ragged. Thomas, another intruder, collapsed near the porch, clutching at a ruined thigh. Blood seeped like dark ink through torn canvas, the wound a grim testament to Maeve's silent campaign. "He's dead weight," snarled Ernie, voices rising in panic. Men yelled, rifles cracked, but Maeve's figure was nowhere to be found. The invaders fumbled blindly, their cohesion disintegrating under the invisible onslaught. Whispers flew like venom. Accusing eyes darted in all directions. They had come here thinking Maeve a silent statue, easy to break, easy to claim. Instead, she was a shadow weaving death among them with relentless resolve. More dangerous than guns, more precise than fire, she manipulated the land itself against them. The mesquite thorns, the traps hidden beneath dust, the creaking boards, all sang her silent song of retribution. The ruffians' voices dwindled into panic as they faced an enemy born of myth and despair. In the midst of their chaos, a ragged figure limped away, wounded yet alive, cradling a deep, jagged slash across his side. He stumbled toward the dark horizon, desperate to send word to the distant third band, rumored to be approaching, a new peril looming on Maeve's razor-edge salvation. The night closed in like a shroud as Maeve vanished once more into the shadows, her quiet war far from over. The remnants of the ruffians gathered like frightened shadows beneath the broken mesquite, their bruised bodies trembling as the invisible weight of fear pressed heavily against their brittle bravado. Dazed by the swift unraveling of their plan, they scrambled to pull themselves together. Yet the ragged silence among them was thick with whispered doubts. Eyes darted nervously, tracking every flicker of movement beyond the flickering campfire's dying glow. The once chaotic band of men was now a fractured huddle, swallowed by their mounting wounds and the choking haze of terror. Maeve slid silently among the twisted branches, the dust beneath her feet untouched by her ghostly passage. Her breath was a calm tide in the storm of their panic, each slow exhale a steady metronome, counting down the ruffians' dwindling hope. She was no longer a broken widow. She was the storm itself, gathering strength beneath the surface, ready to shatter their fragile existence. Their wounded whispered curses and desperate growls answered each new breathless movement. Jacob, clutching his side where dark blood soaked ragged cloth, limped cautiously back into the dim circle of men. His face, pale and marked by pain, flickered between fear and quiet fury. It was a blade, no warning, just deadly, he rasped, voice brittle like cracked leather. Garrett snarled impatiently, shoving closer, weapons shifting with restless fingers. "Who the hell's out there? This ain't right. We're losing our minds." Suspicion rippled outward like poison in their veins. Whispers twisted into accusations. Trust unraveling faster than the scarlet stain growing on Jacob's shirt. Maeve watched from the shadows, her gaze sharp and cold as the gleam of her Apache knife. The land itself seemed to reclaim the power stolen from her. The dry earth and gnarled trees stood as her silent allies. harboring her wrath in every nook. Fear was the ruffians' new master, fragile, spreading like wildfire through their ranks, breaking what little unity remained. The men spread unevenly around the camp, eyes flicking toward every dark hollows and rustling leaf. Every sense strained, every nerve buzzing with dread. A sharp crack, a twig snapped close, betraying David's stepped movement as he rose silently to peer into the darkness beyond the firelight's reach. His breath caught in his throat. The noose of unease drew tighter. Maeve's heartbeat synchronized with the old lessons of her covert training. Each strike a whispered promise, each step one of cautious precision. She moved through the night air as if woven from silk and shadow, lethal grace channeled into every muscle and sinew. The cold steel kissed her palm, her dagger, an extension of fury born from scars, both deep and unseen. David's eyes narrowed, searching for shapes that slipped just beyond his vision. His hand twitched near the rifle butt before he heard the whisper of death closing in. Before a warning could rise from his lips, Maeve's blade flashed through the darkness, swift, precise, unforgiving. Flesh ruptured under the relentless bite of steel. He crumpled soundlessly, a strangled cry, strangled on dry earth, his body folding into oblivion. The rifle clattered useless beside him. Chaos erupted. Shouts pierced the night's tense fabric as rifles aimed blindly into the black, where Maeve had vanished. The ruffians scrambled madly, eyes wide, hearts pounding in their throats. Desperation wove suspicion tightly between them. Each man became a hunter and the hunted, terrified at every shadow and trembling breath. "She's here, among us," spat Garrett, voice trembling with rage and fear. The men's unity splintered, dissolving beneath the crushing weight of paranoia and bloodied wounds. Fingers tightened around rifles. The hopeless dance of terror spun faster. Maeve melted back into the night, a phantom woven from anguish and resolve. Each step retraced memories of the old Apache scout, the hard lines of his face, the steady cadence of his teachings echoing in her bones. Every moonlit clearing, filled with whispered drills, returned to her now, sharpened by loss and fashioned into lethal artistry. At the cabin's edge, hands steady despite the mounting darkness, she retrieved another dagger concealed beneath a loose floorboard. The house was no longer just shelter. It was a weapon, an extension of her silent crusade. Every creak, every settling beam worked for her, betraying footsteps and guiding vengeance. Suddenly, a sharp, raw scream tore the silence, a shriek of pain and terror from the porch. Thomas, another ruffian, collapsed, clutching a ruined thigh where blood welled dark and thick. Panic surged like wildfire, wild cries rising as rifles spat into the obscuring black. Yet Maeve remained unseen, a shadow untouched amidst the chaos. The ruffians flailed blindly, their cohesion shattering with every fresh wound inflicted by an enemy whose name they dared not speak. Whispers fell like venom. Eyes darted with suspicion. Fingers twitched at triggers steeped in fear. The woman they'd sought to silence was instead the embodiment of a nightmare, weaving death with silent precision. Maeve's vengeance was a ghost woven from the land's ancient heart, more precise than gunfire, more terrifying than flame. The mesquite thorns became her sentinels, and dust-shrouded traps spread like silent screams beneath the invaders' feet. The cabin's creaks sang a deadly hymn. In the midst of shattered confidence and mounting fracture, a ragged figure broke away. Limbs heavy, bleeding. Deep from a jagged cut across his side, he limped toward the shadowed horizon. Behind him lay a trail of desperate footsteps and fractured hope, a messenger racing to warn the distant third band rumored to be stalking the valley. The night clenched like a fist around Maeve's hidden domain. Silence, thick and suffocating. Shadows swallowed her once more. Her voice had yet to break the quiet, but her war was far from over. Suddenly, the unmistakable sound of a rough voice pierced the tense hush, a cry of alarm and pain. The Ruffians had done the unthinkable. They had captured one of Maeve's own hidden allies, a man whose loyalty was forged in the secret fires of trust. Bound and gagged, struggling against rough hands, the captive fought to meet Maeve's fierce gaze in the dark. Their desperate captors brandished threats like weapons, promising fire and death to force Maeve's hand. The widow's cold fury burned hotter than any blaze. The next chapter in this deadly saga was poised on the knife's edge, where silence met scream, and justice waited in the shadows. Maeve moved like a shadow through the twilight, the air heavy with the scent of dust and tension. Her gaze was sharp, unwavering as it traced the flickering movements of the ruffians who had dared to trespass on her land. The cacophony of their desperate whispers tangled with the dry rustle of mesquite leaves, a symphony of fear and suspicion, rising like a storm beneath their ragged bravado. Her captured ally was held close by rough hands, bound and gagged, struggling silently with furious, frightened eyes that met hers through the dimness. The man's bindings were crude, but his spirit fought relentlessly, sending a silent plea she understood without words. Maeve's heart clenched, a paradox of fury and fierce protection. He was more than a neighbor. He was her tether to a time before her world fractured, a reminder of what still deserved saving. The ruffian leader paced with snarling impatience, his eyes burning with a hungry fire. "Hold him tight," he growled, "or she'll bleed this place dry before the sun rises." The threat hung thick in the hot, stagnant air, a promise to torch what Maeve had left, to reduce her sanctuary to ashes if she didn't surrender. Their cruel smiles were twisted masks of power, but beneath it writhed raw fear. Maeve's fingers tightened around the cold hilt of her APACHE knife, each breath steady as iron forged by loss. This was the precipice, the moment when silence shattered into violence, and unyielding grief morphed into lethal resolve. She was no longer a woman bowed by sorrow, but a storm coiled in waiting. The knife was no mere weapon, it was an extension of her soul, a bridge between death and justice. Her mind raced through the meticulous strategies etched into her memory, the secret trainings under a sky that had long since forgotten mercy. She would use every shadow, every trap, every silent footfall against these invaders. The ruffians might believe they held her captive, but the land itself whispered secrets Only Maeve knew. Terrain that bent to her will. Mesquite thorns sharpened like spears. The quiet creak of floorboards ready to betray any careless step. A low rumble of anger and desperation surged through the captors as Maeve's eyes locked with the man's, her ally, drawing what little strength remained from her unwavering presence. His eyes sparkled with renewed hope. A reflected flame of defiance that would not be extinguished by rough hands or gagged screams. The night thickened around them like a living thing. Maeve deftly circled, her steps measured and soundless, slipping between pools of shadow and muted earth. Her dual daggers gleamed faintly, symbols of fatal beauty, the embodiment of ancient APACHE precision. She moved closer, her presence a ghostly promise, weaving the deadly dance she had honed in the silence of loss. Suddenly, the leader's face twisted with vile intent. "We'll burn this whole God-forsaken place to the ground if it's the last thing we do," he spat, his voice laced with bitter rage. "Make her bleed, make her scream, make sure nothing's left but ashes and ruin." Tension spiraled, the Ruffians, fractured group, tightening like a noose about Maeve and her captive. Yet beneath the heat and threats, Maeve's calm hardened into steel. Her silence was louder than their brandished weapons, a roar in the void that said she would never break, never yield. Each heartbeat hammered a decree. Her pain was the forge, her silence the weapon. Every scar whispered a story of survival that would not end in defeat. The wind carried the scent of smoke before any flame was visible, a sinister warning in the stillness of the night. Maeve's eyes narrowed, shadows gathering at her feet like loyal wolves. She was ready to strike, to save, to avenge. The ruffian leader's threat hovered like a dark cloud over the burned horizon to come, sealing the fate of this standoff in fire and blood. As the last flicker of fading light vanished behind the distant ridges, the bitter promise was made clear. They would set the property ablaze to flush her out, and Maeve's silent war entered its deadliest hour. The wind barely stirred as Maeve crouched behind. The twisted mesquite, her breath steadying against the ragged chorus of whispered curses and shifting feet, weaving through the shadows of her battered homestead. The air hung heavy with the scent of dust and desperation. All around her, the fractured band of ruffians scrambled, their ears straining for the softest hint of movement, their eyes darting to every patch of darkness, every creaking board, every rustling leaf. Maeve's grip tightened on the worn hilt of her APACHE knife. The blade shimmered faintly, reflecting the frail glow of moonlight that sifted through the thorny branches. This night was her battlefield now, where silence was a weapon sharper than any bullet, and every shadow could deliver death. Amid the fractured murmurs of the invaders, a rough voice hissed, "What happened to Jacob?" Heads turned toward the bloodied figure limping toward the flickering fire's edge. His shirt split open, crimson staining the worn fabric, a stark contrast to the bleached earth beneath his boots. The pain warped his face, every grimace a silent howl. Knife came out of nowhere, he rasped, voice cracked and raw. No noise, no warning, just a slash. Garrett's eyes flickered with dark suspicion. We're damn fools if we think it's just some wild animal. His hand dropped to his rifle as the men exchanged wary glances. Maeve watched, unseen, as the fear slithered beneath their bravado like coiling smoke. The threads that had bound them together were unraveling fast, fractures sharpened by pain and shadowed by dread. Rage knotted in her chest, but was tempered by the calm purpose born of deep scars. Nearby, David stood rigid, peering into the darkness with narrowed eyes, every muscle tense, as if bracing for a storm no one else could see. The night seemed alive around him, thick with unseen dangers. He shifted, footfall barely more than a whisper, and then, in one breathless instant, the silence shattered as Maeve's blade arced through the night air, swift, precise, a flash of cold steel biting into flesh. David's startled gasp was swallowed without a sound as he crumpled, clutching a ragged wound. His rifle clattered uselessly on the dry dirt. Chaos erupted like wildfire. Shouts tore the stillness. Rifles swung blindly toward the shifting shadows where Maeve melted. Away. The ruffians scrambled, stumbling over uncertain ground and fractured trust. "She's here, among us," Garrett spat out, voice raw, eyes wild. The band's unity cracked beneath the weight of their growing terror. Fingers twitched on triggers as paranoia devoured their dwindling courage. Maeve slipped back into the forgiving cloak of darkness, heart steady, every breath measured. The lessons of the old Apache scout echoed in her bones, taught under relentless moons, forging her from brokenness into lethal grace. She paused briefly at the edge of the cabin's worn porch, eyes sweeping the distorted camp layout. Scattered men, uneven watch, vulnerable backs. Her fingers brushed against the hidden dagger beneath the floorboards, an extension of her will and silent promise of retribution. A guttural scream tore through the night, primal and fractured. Thomas collapsed at the foot of the porch steps, clutching a ruined thigh, blood dark and thick pooling beneath him. Panic ignited in the band's ranks as men shouted frantic warnings and rifles cracked into the black. Maeve's form vanished like mist, her vengeance now unmistakable, relentless. The ruffians were caught in a nightmare, woven from their own arrogance, unraveling beneath the weight of an unseen predator. Whispers of betrayal and fear spread poisonously among them. Every misstep seemed ensnared by the land itself. Mesquite thorns like daggers, hidden traps camouflaged beneath dust. The creaking floorboards, singing secrets of a woman transformed by grief into a legend of silent wrath. Like a ragged shadow, fleeing. Dawn. One wounded man broke away, limping fast with a jagged cut bleeding deep across his side. He vanished into the black horizon, desperation fueling his flight. A whispered promise of reinforcement, coming from the distant third band stalking the valley. Maeve's eyes narrowed, 100 silent vows sharpening within her, as the night pressed thick like a closing fist. The remnants of the ruffians, battered and broken, clustered in whispers and trembling breaths, unaware that the true battle was only beginning. Their captive, bound and gagged, struggled fiercely in rough hands near the fire's dying glow. His wild eyes met Maeve's with a flicker of fierce hope. Her silent vow to protect him burned hotter than any fire. the ruffian leader paced like a caged beast, jaws clenched tight, voice venomous. "We'll burn this hellhole to the ground if she won't come out. No more games." Maeve's face stayed calm, her voice finally breaking the long-laden silence, not in words, but in the slow, deliberate tightening of her grip upon the cold blade that was as much a part of her as the scars beneath her skin. Smoke drifted faintly on the wind before any flame dared lick the dry timbers. The threat hung heavy and bitter. The deadly hour had arrived. The last desperate charge, their brutal final assault, was about to begin. The ruffian's captive struggled fiercely, gagged and bound under the flickering glow of their meager campfire. His eyes, wild and desperate, searched Maeve's from across the rough hands that held him fast. She met his gaze with a silent promise, a fierce protection that needed no words. He was not just a neighbor. He was the last tether to a fragment of the life Maeve once had before this nightmare began. Around them, the ruffian leader paced with restless fury, his dark eyes burning with cruel intent. "Keep him tight," the man snarled, voice thick with venom. "If she thinks she can bleed us dry, she'll learn the hard way before dawn." His threat hung heavy in the still air, a promise to turn Maeve's world to ash should she refuse to yield. The others exchanged harsh grins, but beneath their bravado lay raw, palpable fear. Maeve's fingers curled tightly around the worn hilt of her APACHE knife, warmth radiating through her calloused skin. Her breath was steady, calm, like iron hammered by years of agony and silent resolve. This was the knife-edge moment, where her long quiet shattered into violence, and grief became the weapon by which she would carve justice. Her mind raced through each step of the plan she had quietly crafted. Every shadow in the yard was an ally, every hidden trap a weapon waiting to spring. The land was hers, not just by possession, but by intimate knowledge. Thorny mesquite and loose earth would betray the unwary. Creaking floorboards were sentinels ready to sing warnings. Her home was no longer sanctuary, but arsenal. The captive's fierce eyes reflected faint hope, lighting some ember of defiance deep inside Maeve's chest. Together, they were the calm before the storm, the last pulse of resistance amid the gathering darkness. Maeve moved with ghostly grace, circling closer to the enemy. Her dual knives flashed, catching the pale moonlight as symbols of a lethal dance she had practiced under countless dark skies. The air thickened, filled with a tight tension that compressed every breath, every heartbeat. Suddenly, the ruffian leader's face contorted in raw rage. "We'll burn this damn place to the ground, if that's what it takes," he spat, voice jagged with desperation. "Make her bleed, make her scream, leave nothing but ashes." His words slashed the silence, a vile promise etched with bitter hate. The ragged band of invaders tightened their grip, their fractured unity, pressing like a noose around Maeve and her captive. Yet beneath the threats and fury, her calm hardened to steel. Her silence was louder than their shouts, a roar in the void that said she would not break, would not surrender. Every pulse hammered out a decree. Her pain was the forge that made her strong. Her silence, the weapon sharp enough to cut through the darkest night. Each scar whispered stories of survival too fierce to be erased. The wind shifted, carrying a faint burn of smoke before any flame dared breach the night's quiet. Maeve's eyes narrowed. The shadows around her gathered like faithful wolves, the scent of fire an ominous herald. She was ready, not merely to fight or flee, but to turn the burning fury toward those who sought to destroy all she had left. In the thickening darkness, the ruffian leader's threat hung like a shroud over the homestead. They would set her world aflame to force her out, and Maeve's silent war crossed into its deadliest hour. Smoke curled low and thick above the cracked earth, a slow, creeping shadow that settled over Maeve's battered homestead. The fire they had threatened, the cruel flame that haunted her promise, licked at the dry timbers, sending a harsh orange glow flickering through the mesquite. The air was sharp with the scent of smoke and something older, deeper, the sharp taste of endings. Maeve crouched just beyond the cabin's broken porch, her breath steady and her fingers tight around the cold hilt of her APACHE knife. The dual daggers gleamed faintly in the firelight, a deadly dance frozen in steel. Behind her, the dry earth whispered, the almost imperceptible creak of floorboards beneath the ruffian's feet, a bitter testament to the home she was bound to defend until the last heartbeat. Her captive, still bound and gagged, fought fiercely in the hands of rough men, his dark eyes locked with hers, silent sparks of defiance, far louder than any plea. To Maeve, he was a fragile tether to a time before her world shattered, and now a reason to endure. The ruffian leader prowled near the fire's edge, his face twisted by rage and a desperate hunger for control. "Keep him tight," he snarled, voice biting the thick night air. "Let her see what she'll lose if she won't come out. A dawn of ashes awaits this cursed place." Maeve held her silence, like a blade sharper than any threat. Every scar beneath her sleeves told stories of survival. Every quiet breath was a promise forged in pain and fury. The land was hers, no longer just soil and timber, but a battleground where vengeance and justice were intertwined in every shadow. A sudden crackling stirred the air, a mesquite branch succumbing to the weight of an unseen step. The ruffians bristled, weapons tightened in clammy hands. Maeve moved like a wraith, melting through darkness, the subtle echo of her footsteps swallowed by the night's embrace. She slid closer to the fire, a deadly whisper carried in silk and steel. Her eyes narrowed as she read the fractured band before her. Desperation clawed at their faces, shattered bravado barely concealing the bleeding wounds and crumbling resolve. The leader's snarled threat hung like a noose tightening around hope, but Maeve's calm hardened into an unbreakable edge. Her dual blades flashed, catching the firelight in brief, fierce arcs as she danced into the fray, the embodiment of every lesson carved deep within her by old APACHE wisdom. Swift strikes fell like silent thunder. Men crumpled without sound nor warning, collapsing into the dry dust where they once threatened her sanctuary. The air filled with ragged cries, curses swallowed by the night, as the ruffians' momentum shattered, unraveling beneath the power of a ghostly force that none could see, but all feared. One by one the intruders broke, their cohesion lost under suspicion and fear. Fingers twitched near guns that fired blindly into shadows. Eyes darted accusingly at allies turned enemies by paranoia's cruel poison. Maeve's captive struggled, the bindings fraying as hope brightened in his gaze. She moved swiftly, cutting ropes like ribbons in the dying firelight, her silent promise a sharpened shield around him. Together, they were no longer prey, but tempest, unleashed and unyielding. The fire pressed closer now, tendrils of smoke curling into heavy gusts as flames began to claim the worn planks of her home. The ruffian leader snarled, ragged and defeated, backing away from the rising inferno. "If we can't have it, no one will," he spat. Before retreating into the mounting chaos, Maeve's eyes never left the blaze. The house, the vessel of so many painful memories, burned fiercely, yet within her chest an ember glowed, not of destruction, but rebirth. The weight of loss behind her was palpable, but the silence she bore now was not defeat. It was a fierce stillness, the deep calm of one forged anew by fire and sorrow. Each breath was a reclaiming of self, every step forward, a quiet defiance against the fate that had sought to consume her. As the flames climbed higher, Maeve lifted her gaze to the horizon, where the first hints of dawn bled pale and hopeful into the sky. The arid wind whispered through the mesquite, carrying away the smoke, the ashes, and the echoes of that long night. She was no longer just a widow cloaked in silence. She was a warrior reborn, marked by loss but unbroken, a shadow turned light, ready to walk forward into a future carved by her own steady hand. The land stood witness to her resurrection. The scars etched on the earth mirrored those hidden beneath her skin, both reminders that sometimes, from the harshest destruction, true strength is born. Maeve took a final breath, sharp and clear, the weight of the past slowly lifting. Behind her, the ruins smoldered like a fading wound. Ahead, the path stretched endless and bright. The silent revenge had reached its end, and with it, a new beginning ignited deep within her spirit, untamed, unyielding, free.